Hey everybody, Blast Cat Badger here. Badger Actual's off doing something else, so I'm taking over for the time being. So yeah, uh, before I begin the video, we need members. We seriously need members. We can't leave it all up to the very few, select few who try to keep the channel going as much as they can. We can't leave it up to them. We need members. We need you. All right, it's a pretty big deal. Um, there's two tiers. All right, it's not about how much you give, right? Because I said how much you give, right? It's a very small amount. It is less than you would pay for a piece of string, technically, depending on the size of the string. Well, anyway, that being said, go ahead and click that join button. Become an okay human or decent human. The more of y'all that join, the better, right? It's very cheap, doesn't cost nothing, set and forget. So yeah, that's a big deal for the channel. It's not about how much, it's about how many, right? That being said, let's get into this one. We enjoy this person a great deal. At least I do. All right? I like him a lot. He's one of my favorite professors ever. It's Wendigoon. Wendigoon. That time the CIA faked a vampire attack to take over a country. This will be interesting, I think. But let me know what y'all think. Let's go. Let's listen to some Professor Wendy, shall we?
Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the time the CIA faked a vampire attack in order to take over the Philippines. Yeah. Several of my videos discussing weird historic events can be qualified as conspiracy theories, or at least conspiracy adjacent, but this one has been documented by government accounts, several journalists, people who were there and affected by it, as well as the people who organized it themselves, so pretty straightforward. After World War II, the American government was concerned with communist influence in Southeast Asia. In order to establish power within Southeast Asia, the American government began commandeering several countries in the region. Among their places of concern was the area of central Luzon, Philippines.
Yeah, we all know how that stuff goes down. But then again, this is just pretty much par for the course when it comes to humans in general. I don't think there are any human beings at all who have not conquered other human beings in some shape or form and in some capacity ever in the history of ever. So, yeah.
However, in the late 40s and early 50s, there was a local rebellion taking place within the Philippines that the government would have to quell in order to establish dominance in the region. So, in 1950, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Lansdale was sent to the region in order to stop the rebellion by any means necessary. Since the rebel forces were composed of a guerrilla army, direct force didn't seem to work. So instead, Lansdale moved to psychological operations. And among those operations, as we'll talk about, were vampires. The story and a lot of the conspiracies around it run deeper than just hoo hoo ha ha vampire attack, but we'll also get to the hoo hoo ha ha vampire attack, so don't worry. But you'll see how a vampire attack in the Philippines connects to the Kennedy assassination and also sabotage condoms. I'm not kidding. As soon as I heard about this story, I had to immediately tell somebody about it. I mean, it's too weird not to. And as we move into the spooky season, I think this is a pretty good topic to bring up. So,
It's good. Like, I mean, pretty much all of the most, like, goofiest just shit ever. Like, the most Looney Tune, cartoony, Acme Studios, like, kind of stuff cooked up back then was all the CIA. Every single bit of it. I mean, we saw them try to assassinate Fidel Castro in so many different ways and fail. It was like one of those cartoons from like my youth when I was much younger, where it was like Wile E. Coyote and the freaking Roadrunner, or Tom and Jerry. Just so outlandish and ridiculous. And it was always the CIA. That's how you knew the CIA had their hands in it. Was that it was the most outlandish and cartoony shit ever. That's just it was ridiculous.
So if that sounds interesting to you, stick around as we talk about the time that the CIA pretended to be vampires. This is my life now. And while we're talking about the spooky season, let's talk about the scariest thing of all.
Well, hey, dude. Look, okay? Look, you can't complain. You can't complain. Okay? It's your fault that you've got millions of subscribers. All right? So you can't complain. You got no right to. You have no right to complain. Speaking of which, you want to swing some of them my way? Blast Cat Badger. Hi, I'm a big fan. Talk about shilling to the nth degree. Anyway, let's keep going.
Having your personal data stolen while you browse the internet. But fear no more, Netflix. All you have to do is have access on board. Wendigoon, $99 a month. I'll add to it, but as always, thank you for watching. Now, the Philippines' relation with the United States has always been messy, but for the sake of this video, we're just going to look at World War II onwards. During the beginning of World War II, the majority of the Philippines were captured by the Japanese military. As soon as the imperial military had taken over the Philippines, they began to use its people and resources for the war effort. And not only did the people of the Philippines have things like their food and farms stolen by the Japanese, but in some cases, the military would even begin to steal their women and children. So, as you can imagine, several of the Philippine people began to fight back. The primary group of Philippine freedom fighters were known as the Hukbalahap. The Hukbalahap, also known as the Huk Rebellion, is an acronym that translates to the People's Anti-Japanese Army. During the war, the Americans would use the help of the Huks in order to destroy the Japanese holdouts that were within the Philippines. And as the Japanese began to clear out of the region, the Americans would begin to enlist the help of Filipino businessmen and elected leaders. However, this is where the problems begin. So, during the beginning of World War II, before America got involved and Japan was taking over the Philippine Islands, several of the businessmen and politicians tried to earn the favor of the Japanese so that they would have a more favorable outcome as the war progressed. So in the first years of the war, several of these leaders and landlords had allied themselves to the Japanese and would not only feed and house them, but give them advice about fighting their own people who were in the People's Anti-Japanese Army. So at the end of the war, whenever the US government was trying to reinstitute the Filipino government, and they did it using the pre-existing leaders of the Philippines, that doesn't go over well with the people who have been fighting them for the past 4 years, as you could imagine.
Also, it wasn't just like businessmen and political leaders and like local counselors and all that kind of stuff, right? Or community chief. It wasn't just them. It was actually a good proportion of the population. It was a huge proportion of the population that actually did help out the Japanese to a huge degree. Now, can we really fault them for that? Not really. Not really. You're not the same as the two different types of people who are fighting over where you've lived, right? So, yeah, they're just look. All they were doing was just trying to see who it was that they could get the best deal out of, essentially, right? Now, people are going to bring up all this honor and integrity, dignity, blah, 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 whatever, right? You weren't there, so just hush up about it. I wasn't there. And that's why I don't have one thing to say about it or the other on too much, really. But then again, like, okay, yes, you can say whatever you want about it. Your opinion's your opinion. And here's mine, right? A good actual proportion of the population helped the Japanese because they wanted to get rid of the Americans. But a good amount of the population were helping the Americans because they wanted to get rid of the Japanese, and they preferred the Americans to the Japanese. It wasn't just the people that were on the tippy top of everything. It wasn't just them. But they like to point to them because history is written by people on the left. So, yeah. Capitalism bad, businessmen, blah, blah, whatever. Shut up. It was just people doing their best. Now, should they have done all of that? Well, would you? Would I? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Me, I don't blame them one way or the other, honestly.
Because several of these leaders had helped the Japanese destroy their country, and then America comes in and says, yeah, these guys are still in charge. And while tensions were high, there was no direct violence, at least until 1946, when the leader of the PKM, a group that the Hucks were allied to, was murdered. Then they decided to get violent again. They changed their name from the People's Anti-Japanese Army to the People's Liberation Army, but still went by the name of Huck. And as America was trying to make a new government for the Philippines, the Hucks would smuggle weapons into the mountainside and begin to grow local resistance. It also didn't help the government's case that these local leaders, who had previously had to do things under the watchful eye of the Japanese military, were now pretty much given free rein by the Americans. So as soon as these leaders got power, they began to take a bunch of the food and resources from farmers and essentially just be a jerk to the peasant class that they didn't care for, which helped to increase support for the opposing Huck Rebellion. And by 1949, it's estimated that the Hucks had anywhere from 11,000 to 15,000 active fighters.
Well, honestly, that makes sense.
A couple things to note with this is, for one, whenever you read about the Hucks in American or pretty much any official history text, they're kind of just called an offshoot of the Soviet Union and a directly communist strong arm of theirs in the Philippines, because during that time of the Cold War, the concern was between American capitalism and Russian communism. So anytime there was any problem or enemy that came up against America, they'd say, oh, well, they're just in league with the communists. And because of that, the Hucks have gone down in history as a communist fighters group. And while the Hucks were allies with the PKP, who was a group of fighters who were a part of the Soviet Union, all of the Huck fighters were like farmers who just didn't like having their stuff stolen. So while you could maybe argue that kind of was in line with some of the beliefs, they just didn't want to get pushed around. So calling them a Soviet Union military organization is exaggeration at best.
Well, maybe, but they did side with communists. Then again, for them, it was probably like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But them being a direct offshoot, not so much.
I'd also mention that while everything I've said until this point paints the Hucks out to be just like these valiant freedom fighters fighting against the government, and while there were certainly elements of that, by 1949 the movement had become large enough that people would claim the name of the Huck Rebellion so that they could get away with things like murder and robbery. So while there definitely was a good cause, at least in the beginning, by 1949, 1950, the Hucks were seen as a bunch of rampant pillagers, at least around heavily populated areas. In the mountainside where the original Huck rebels were, there was more of a grassroots movement to help them, but that dissonance can't last long. Government is not being good to its people, and some of the people are acting a fool. Now, did the United States government care about this? No. They were concerned with the Russian threat, and everything they did was to advance that end, as we're going to see. So if America is going to have a position of power in the Philippines, which is a very strategic location for anything in Southeast Asia, then they're going to have to deal with this local infighting. So in 1950, the Pentagon sent one of their best men to the Philippines, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Lansdale. Now, if you're weird like I am and into crazy Cold War psyop stuff, Lansdale is a very familiar name. He wrote the book for what would become the majority of psyop tactics from Vietnam forward. He's also very instrumental in a lot of special forces training and tactics and adventures that they would go on later. And he was actually one of the founding members of the CIA. Before World War II, when he would join the military, Lansdale was an advertising executive in San Francisco. From that job, he developed knowledge as to how people's minds work and how to convince them of what you want them to think. So whenever he joined the military during World War II, he was sent to the Operation of Strategic Services, or the OSS, which after the war, the members of it created the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA. So Lansdale, one of the first ever CIA agents, gets to the Philippines in 1950 and creates something called the Civil Affairs Office. The Civil Affairs Office was a means for Lansdale to communicate with Filipino leaders of how they can best destroy the Filipino rebellion. As an expert in psychological warfare, Lansdale said that the best way to convince a people of what you want them to think is by using their own truths and ideas against them. So after analyzing the situation and speaking with other leaders, Lansdale determined that the majority of Filipino people were very superstitious and had a lot of religious beliefs tied to local tradition. So he decided that that is how he's going to get them.
Which there is always going to be an element of that for pretty much any, for a lot of cultures actually to this day. Like there's still a very heavy dosage of superstition in like second world, third world countries, even some first world countries. Like in Japan, there's still like a very superstitious like kind of thing going on there. Like certain types of traditions they stick by. Or China. Like wait, I can't remember if this was specific to Taiwan or China. But there's like a superstition where it's like if you're like on like a sail, like their version of a sailboat, right? Or what do they used to call them? Junks. I believe that's what they used to call them. Junks. Don't believe me though. Look this up, please. It's been so long since I've been over there. But yeah, they believed that if you like took your like bowl and you flipped it over, that you would wish for your ship or your junk to capsize, which was I was just like, okay, sure, that's totally how it works. But yeah, there's this super heavy dosage of this all over the place though. That can be used to your advantage. So in some places that I may or may not have been, we would play on the tropes of like their what they would consider a boogeyman, right? Like the loup-garou, or for some other people, a certain creature that translates in English to goat sucker, essentially. We would use that to our advantage because some people in a place I'm very close to right now are very superstitious there as well. So, and then people who go through the desert, they see crazy stuff all the time. So it's whenever they see what looks to them like glowing eyes coming up to them, they're gonna lose their shit. But there's a certain amount of that you can only take it so far, right? You can only stretch it so heavily before you have to add in like the other elements, like understanding the culture and what the people, what's the emphasis of the individual, thinking that makes up the mass of everybody else of what they, it's a conglomeration of that, right? What do we get from human, right? And SIGINT, like what are they watching all the time? We would get a very good understanding of local culture, customs, courtesies, what traditions they have, what are their special holidays and times of year and stuff, like what's their religion like, how deeply do they believe in certain thoughts, ideas, and we would capitalize, we would find like common threads through that, capitalize on that, right? So that you can get people to your side. You can build rapport with them. And these are going to be, also you're going to be able to find people who have a predilection towards the people they don't like being in charge of them. So it's pretty easy to spring up like a freedom fighters force. I can say that, but I can't say all the other stuff on YouTube. And what I'm just doing is I'm just taking the most simplistic way of putting it, right? But an element of it would be like superstitions. So like La Llorona in Hispanic culture, stuff like that. Taking advantage of things like that. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I totally understand why he would zero in on that.
First of these operations went as follows. On a cloudy day, he had someone fly a small airplane with a very large speaker attached to it. This airplane flew over the Philippine countryside, where it was believed that several of the locals were aiding and embedding Huck rebels. And from this large speaker flying through the clouds, played several curses in the locals' native language. These messages said that any collaborators who are helping the local rebels will have their family cursed and all of their belongings destroyed if they continue to aid them. And it seems that this worked, as in the following weeks, several groups of Huck rebels turned themselves into the authorities because they were starving. See, typically with these guerrilla factions, they have to rely on the goodwill of others and create this underground network of supplies and shelter in order to sustain themselves. But now that these people were afraid of a curse and kicked them out, they had no other option but to turn themselves in or starve to death.
Yeah, that's one thing about like starting up like a freedom fighting force, because I'm almost, oh man, so hard. Anyway, YouTube hates me as much as they are going to at the moment. I'm trying not to add to it, okay? But yeah, to start like a local freedom fighters, group, or local fighters group, we'll call it that, LFG. Cool. We came up with our own acronym, guys. They can't stop us all. Anyway, the only problem with doing it where it's like you have to do it completely from scratch, essentially, or that there's some people that there's like you've got a human and SIGINT that tells you that indicates to you that there are local nationals in this country or area or whatever who are of the mind to fight against, like, let's say their government or this like bad other local fighters group or whatever. And you would want them to succeed over everybody else, right? Okay, but they only have so much that they themselves can provide for themselves. So you have to find out ways to procure more supplies, gear and equipment. You would have to more often than not locally source it. If you can't take the risk of bringing weapons into the country, you have to locally source it, or you have to find the routes that it goes through, and you can tactically acquire it on its way to somebody else. If you have enough, members of your local fighters group, so yeah, cool, to effect that tactical acquisition, right? If you've had enough time to train them, enough time for you to stockpile just enough to pull off like a really successful near ambush or something like that, to tactically acquire more stuff that you need, right? But that does add an element of difficulty. Because you might have to bide your time. Maybe they're always heavily guarded, so you have to build up your forces and build up, enough arms and ammo to to effectively, engage, the level of security that they're going to have, or to at least distract it, or scatter them somehow. Like, you have to figure something out, right? met TC all the freaking way. Um, so you have to basically account for so much more extra stuff versus you've got your own gear equipment and all your own stuff, and you can ship it in yourself. So let's say like airdrop or a Chinook, going to the border or something, or you could have it brought in on like unmarked trucks or something, or let's say it's not even something super duper like you're already gonna be known to be there, right? It's a conflict zone, and maybe some local elders brought you in to help, right? And you're trying to affect a successful outcome that's in your best interest or in the best interest of your country, right? And their country as well, depending on how it goes. Uh, so yeah, then you'll just be able to like set up shop somewhere and then bring your own stuff in. But if you have to do it all yourself, right? If you have to source it locally, everything that you need, that adds a whole other layer of difficulty. Um, because not every single place has all the same exact kind of stuff going on. Yeah, anyway, I went way too long and off on that one. But long story short, I know what he's talking about here, right? You do have to basically, you're pretty much this close to being at the goodwill and mercy, I'll say that much because you're always outnumbered, of your what you're trying to create of like the local nationals, essentially, right? You're trying to make an LFG, a local fighters group, to go up against these other local fighters groups or this government or something, but you have to source everything locally. That means you have to get really good rapport with like the local nationals you're friendly with, that are friendly with the people that you're training up and stuff, and you have to get to know like which routes go where for what reason, who comes this way and why, who goes that way and why. There's such a larger element that comes into play there. Yeah, yeah. Let's continue. This stuff. Oh man, let's just keep going.
So, seeing that this was working, Lansdale doubled down. Lansdale had several men embedded into the local population in order to give him information as to where the Hucks were or what they were doing. So, using this information, Lansdale began to get data on which specific houses were aiding the rebels. Then, under the cover of night, his agents would go out next to these houses and spray paint these large watching eyes on the streets around these houses. So imagine that you are a local person who is invading a group of rebels, and while you're supportive to their cause, you also have yourself and your family to look out for. And then one day you go to bed, and when you wake up, there are eyes painted all around your house. Would probably make you think twice about helping these guys out. So because of this, collaborators became more few and far between, and the Huck rebels had to more so rely on their own resources. And now that we've set the stage for all that, let's talk about the vampires. Now, the term vampire is a bit of an oversimplification of what actually happened. The Filipino people have a legend of a creature known as an aswang. Aswang itself is kind of an overarching term that can embody ideas from witchcraft to zombie-like risen dead people to demonic spirits or what have you. But the commonality seen throughout Aswang belief is that they are a blood-sucking creature who drains the blood of their victims, most often through a long tongue that shoots out and stabs people kind of like a mosquito. So Lansdale, having seen that flying a plane and pretending to be God worked, maybe they should try the vampire thing. Specifically, there was a mountaintop in central Luzon that was a strategic control point for the Huck rebels. And Lansdale decided to literally scare them out. So he had a couple of his men go to the villages around the mountain and begin talking of how they saw an aswang on the mountain nights prior.
It sounds a lot like something else that I mean, this sounds like a story I heard from somebody, where they took a local tradition of, you know, not tradition, but like a cultural superstition of some local nationals, and they basically made it real with a drone, a like one of those like cheaply made they're like a Halloween costume, like a Halloween prop, essentially. It was like okay, it was like skull and bones, like a skeleton, right? That was like draped in the robes, like the tattered, like dirtied up like robes of like an imam, and yeah, so so what happened was is that they basically flew that sucker over a bunch of like I think it's safe to say Hakani network. I think it's safe to say that. Over a bunch of those guys. Um, yeah. Well, needless to say, like, dude, they tricked it out. They tricked it out. Apparently, they made it to where like they can make things glow on command, and the drone was like I don't know what else they did to it, but they tried to make it quieter. I guess they kind of succeeded. Um, and they flew it over some Hakani Network guys and scared the bejesus out of them. Next thing you know, they're firing in all freaking directions, and it's just hilarious to watch. Oh man, but that's the story I heard. Anyway, that's what I heard. I heard that they did that. They actually, I heard they actually did that with a drone. So yeah, um, I could see it working. I honestly, especially if there's like if you're in a country where the cultural superstitions are really strong, especially there.
Sure enough, other rebels said that within the day, people in the town began to tell stories of how there is an aswang or demonic creature draining the blood of people in the forest around the mountain. So Lansdale waited a couple days, at which point he was sure that the information got back to the Huck rebels directly, and then decided to send a group to attack. So a couple nights after this story's been floating around, there is a group of Huck rebels on top of the mountain doing a patrol around the trails along the top of the mountain itself. And as they're patrolling, this group of hitmen sneak up on them. Whenever the patrol has their guard down, they grab the guy in the back of the patrol and drag him into the bushes. Once they've got a hold of him, they kill him and take two small puncturing devices. I'm not sure if it was like a screwdriver or what, but they put two holes into his neck and hung him upside down to drain all the blood from his body. Then once that's done, they threw his body back onto the trail where he went missing so that whenever his guys come looking for him, they find his body drained of blood with two puncture holes in the neck. So yes, with no exaggeration, straight from their own admittance and declassified records, the CIA staged a vampire attack on this random Filipino freedom fighter.
Oh, brother. But it could work. It could work, especially if, like I said, the cultural superstitions have to be really strong. And I'm talking like they would believe it if they think that they saw it, if they think they did. That's all it takes, really, especially with those kind of people. Um, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. And quite honestly, if you're good with it, you can snatch people up like at the trail end of any type of group. And if you're real good with it, you can shut them up real fast. Um, but yeah, let's continue.
And perhaps even more surprisingly, it worked. The next day, the entire rebel force cleared off of the mountain. Now, is this because they thought that an Aswang was attacking them and may kill their entire camp? Possibly. But also, like, if I was with a group of friends and we were camping on a mountain and we thought that one of us had been killed by a vampire, we would probably leave. But if I was with a group of friends on top of the mountain and we thought that some random dude killed our friend and staged it to look like a vampire, we would also probably leave. And yeah, it can be safely assumed that at least some people thought it was an Oswong. At the same time, a lot of people probably thought that it was the CIA killing them and draining their blood, which is also a pretty good reason to get out of there. From here, psychological operations continued in the Philippines for some time to come. And while everyone likes to remember the flying plane threatening curses at people and the giant eyes and obviously the vampire attack, there were a lot of other psychological operations that had the same, if not greater, effect. For example, Lansdale began a radio show that people in the mountains for the first time could hear directly from their leaders how they're trying to rebuild the country. Lansdale made sure that government officials were no longer being abusive to the locals, which, again, if the locals feel like they're not being oppressed, they don't really have the need to support a group of freedom fighters. And several government leaders would dress up and pretend to be Huck rebels and go through villages stealing food and yelling at people. So as villagers began to think that the government was beginning to have their best interests and be supportive, while the Hucks were murdering people and acting like jerks, half legitimate, half government officials dressed up as Huck rebels, then support for the Huck Rebellion began to die out. It was also about this time, again around 1953, that the Filipino government was like, wow, thanks America, we sure are glad you helped us out with those rebels. You can go ahead and leave whenever you want. And the CIA was like, yeah, leave. While Lansdale was there, he became friends with someone known as Raymond Magsaysay. During Lansdale's operations in the country, Raymond was the head of their Department of Defense, and Raymond aided Lansdale in his operations in the Philippines. So the two became friends whenever Lansdale was doing his operations, and around 1952 he says, hey Raymond, why don't you run for president? And Raymond says it's a great idea and begins to run. But as soon as he does, he quickly realizes that it's not him running for president, it's the CIA running for president. Raymond was used as a puppet, and everything from his speeches to his policies were decided by the US government. To ensure Raymond's election, the CIA began running smear campaigns against all of Raymond's opponents.
Sounds like a very familiar playbook, doesn't it? Sounds exactly like what's going on in the great old US of A right now. Oh, giving the Central Intelligence Agency too much power definitely did not backfire ever.
Everything from rumors in the paper to spiking their drinks before they gave a speech in order to make them look unfavorable to the public. One day, before he gave a speech, Raymond suggested that perhaps this time, instead of Lansdale and the CIA giving him a speech, maybe Raymond could write his own speech or have one of the locals help him write his speech. And Lansdale got so mad that he began to hit Raymond to the point that Raymond was knocked out. By the time Raymond was elected in 1953, he was so battered and scared of the US government that he sent a message directly to President Eisenhower that said, I will do whatever the United States wants me to do, even if my people disagree with it. Also from declassified reports, whenever the day of the election came and Raymond was elected, it turns out the CIA had illegally smuggled guns into the country and hidden them around the city so that if he wasn't elected, they could stage a coup. In 1957, he even passed a new law that said the Philippines will never accept any form of communism, as it, quote, puts us under the control and domination of an alien power. And you know, we wouldn't want that now, would we?
Oh, man. But hey, like they say, better us than them, right? Which I wholeheartedly agree with that one. I honestly do. Better the U.S. than everybody else, because what everybody else did was horrendous compared to everything we did. I mean, we were pretty bad, but damn, some of the stuff that the Soviet Union did, and the Chinese Communist Party, and Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il. Oh, dude. Apologies, I'm getting tired. But yeah, dude. We've done some really messed up stuff. I mean, I've been a part of that a couple of times. Or maybe not. You'll never know. Or maybe that was Badger Actual. But he's not going to be back for a couple of days, I think. Or at least I hope so. But yeah, like, we've done some pretty bad stuff, but nothing like the rest of the world. So yeah, are we saints by any measure? No. But we're the closest we got. So rather us than them, I guess, but at the same time, it's still messed up. It's still very messed up.
Raymond died in a plane crash in 1957, and immediately the CIA had a new puppet that they wanted to run. And one of the opponents of the CIA, who was also running at the time, was named Claro Recto. And initially, the CIA just wanted to kill him, but then decided they couldn't for logistic purposes. So as part of their smear campaign against him, they began to leave these packages of condoms all over populated areas that said they were from Claro Recto, but in the top of all of them was a very visible hole poke, so that the people would think this guy running for office wants to sabotage their love life for some reason. In May of 1954, the leader of the Huck rebels, Louis Taruk, would turn himself into the authorities, and surprisingly only got 15 years in jail, which I would assume they'd just kill him. But with Taruk turning himself in, a lot of people considered 1954 to be the official end of the Hucks. Lansdale was shortly thereafter transferred to Vietnam, even though we weren't officially there yet. And from there, Lansdale would go on to develop a lot of the tactics that were used in psychological warfare during the war in Vietnam. Among them, famously, is Operation Wandering Soul, where they tried to convince Vietnamese soldiers that there were ghosts in the jungle. And no, I'm not kidding. However, he wasn't
But there actually was ghosts in the jungle.
directly involved with that operation. It was more so his influence and the departments he created, because at the time he was the lead in Operation Mongoose. Operation Mongoose was the secret operation that didn't officially happen until they said it officially happened years later, like they always do, where Lansdale was officially tasked with killing Castro, or at least destroying the Cuban government by whatever means possible. After Lansdale's failure with this and things like the Bay of Pigs operation, he was officially fired from his position as head over CIA psychological warfare by the Kennedy administration, more specifically McNamara. However, he still maintained several ties to the CIA after this, and according to many theorists, was a part of the Kennedy assassination.
Who do you think done it? Let me know in the comments down below.
Or if he wasn't directly one of the collaborators, at least knew about it. Which, for a guy who's already faked a vampire attack and pretended to be God, I'm sure killing a president's like a normal Tuesday for him. And with that, we have the end of the story of that time the CIA pretended to be vampires in order to take over the Philippines. See, I told you I wasn't lying. And remember, kids, the next time that somebody tells you the government wouldn't do that, oh yes they would. Because if pretending to be vampires is something they're just willing to throw out there, think about the stuff they're not willing to tell us. And while I'll probably do longer videos in the future where I compile a lot of them, I read about this story and there was no way I couldn't talk about it immediately right now with no hesitation. So hopefully if you're still watching, you think it's at least half as cool as I know it is. And if you do, that's really cool. And I'm really glad you're here and you're really cool. And I just want to say, thank you for watching. Thank you.
All right, there we go. Professor Wendy. That time the CIA faked a vampire attack to take over a whole country. Yeah. And now there's a whole lot of people who want to give those people literally absolute authoritarian power over all of us. Yet somehow it's the people on the opposite side who say we shouldn't have much of a government at all that are the evil bad guys. Yeah, something a little suspicious about that one, isn't there? Anyway, that being said, what did y'all think? What did y'all think? Y'all let me know in the comments down below. All right, y'all know what time it is. You like me, okay? You like Wendigoon. I like Wendy. Professor Wendy is like the shit. I like him. Do you like these stories? Do you like my content and his content mixture? Do you like all this stuff? Then please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And then get into the Discord. The link will be in the description box down below. That's the best way to get notified of new content because YouTube will not send you notifications because YouTube hates my kind. So, yeah, definitely do that. And then on top of that, become a member. We need members. We seriously need members. Yes, we need members. And it's not about how much you give, it's about how many will. All right. So there's two tiers. There's okay human, decent human, both of which are cheap, dirt cheap, cheaper than this hat. Actually, yeah, cheaper than this hat. This hat is actually very cheap. Thankfully, because of where I live, it's very cheap. Um, but yeah, cheaper than this hat. You know, cheaper than a pack of baby wipes. You know, like I said, it's not gonna hurt anyone and bankrupt anyone. But that's the best way and cheapest way to support the channel. We need members. We need you. So get to clicking. That being said, be good. Seriously. Seriously. Be good. We don't know what's going to happen. Be safe. Don't compromise safety and security for anything or anyone. If you work in a place or live in a place where you have to compromise on either, leave. It's not worth your life. It's not worth your life, your happiness, or your sanity. Go somewhere else. And make a good life for yourselves. Is the best that you can right now. Disaster is only ever a second away. We never know when it's going to strike. And it only takes that long to happen. I mean, heck, Putin deployed a big, giant nuclear whatever thingy the other day that I completely forgot existed because it's ridiculous that something like that exists. Hopefully it doesn't work as, hopefully it works just as well as the Russian military does. So we don't have to worry about it. But if it malfunctions, it still might be bad. So definitely join before that happens. That being said, this is Blessed Cat Badger. Out.